Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we're interviewing Mick. Mick is a social entrepreneur based in Trinidad. Today, he gave us his view on business and economic trends as the curve flattens and we emerge into post-pandemic world.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HCJ.tax.
We're live. Well, good morning on my side. Good evening to you, Mikhail. How are you?
To you, Derren. It's a pleasure to see you.
Great. Please introduce yourself to anyone who may be listening or watching.
Right. So my name is Mick Newman. I am a recently turned social entrepreneur. After 20 years in the corporate world, I left and I decided to start a couple of social businesses, social impact businesses. One is a professional services advisory firms, reputation management, marketing, etc. Mm-hmm. And the other one is a food business called Morenitos, which is aiming to use homeless people and young people who have a drug substance abuse background, skill them up and get them producing food, healthy, sustainable food for communities.
Okay.
So it's been a hell of a journey the last few years.
Absolutely. And now going through what we're going through right now, unprecedented it is. I guess when you say it's hell of a journey, it's going to be a hell of a journey going forward as well. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? How do you see what's going on right now impacting all of us in the future?
So, you know me for a long time. So, I'm quite a reflective and inflective person. And I'm looking at this with two lenses. I'm looking at this from an economic perspective and from a societal human behavioral perspective. And I think this pandemic really brings to life some of the fragile threads that are holding our westernized democracy together, right? As well as how we define society and community. Yeah. So from an economic perspective, I'm interested in, global supply chains and wages and productivity, the nature of work, which are the types of businesses that will prosper post the pandemic, world. After financial crisis of 7-8 years ago, we saw people came back to work quite quickly. And it was all about rebuilding the economy. And it will be the same thing here. But actually, to get over this pandemic, we're trying to get people not to go to work and to work differently. And we are going to see small to medium-sized businesses fail, SMEs fail. We're going to see big corporations restructuring and downsizing and becoming more fit for purpose, right? The nature of work. We're going to see, like you talked about earlier, people moving to online ways of working as opposed to working in offices and working face-to-face. So the nature of relationships are changing, and I think, to be honest, the millennials and their ability to work online and build relationships online is actually quite beneficial. We can learn from them going forward. The soon to, what's coming up on the horizon is falling oil prices. So democracies that are heavily energy dependent, like Trinidad and Tobago, will see some serious job cuts, as companies resize themselves and the vertical supply chain get sort of redefined. So, economies in the Caribbean, for example, are dependent on tourism and hospitality. They've already taken serious hits and they will continue to take serious hits. Next door we have Venezuela and a massive refugee contingency coming from Venezuela who work in the tourism and hospitality industry that can't work, can't pay rent. So now we have that added stress on the economy. So I think governments now have to seriously rethink the way they structure their social services going forward. Right, and the way and what their balance of their portfolio balance in terms of GDP, how it works, and what kind of plans and strategies they have going forward. In terms of human behavior, that's the interesting bit. So we have seen so much evidence over the past month of human beings disregarding orders. We know that people like to find ways of getting what they want. But when you have a serious situation like this, where viruses are being spread by contact, and people still having parties and having parties at home and going and not social distancing properly or at all, it really, really sends a message as to what society and communities we have in place. Recently in the UK, you've seen, the frontline health workers of the NHS being spat upon and being attacked now because people are frustrated and people are taking out their anger on people. And these are the people who are supposed to be our heroes, helping us in the front line. So human behavior now and human behavior over the next 2 to 3 years post-pandemic is going to be something that we need to seriously think about and address quite quickly. As an entrepreneur and someone who, like you, watches the cash flow and the balance sheet quite closely, our ability to deliver value real time, to recraft our offer for our clients, right, in a landscape, bear in mind, that is becoming increasingly cluttered. So that content that you talked about, the generation of useful and relevant content, right, and the ability to achieve cut-through in an online digital space that is now going to increase, 100%, 200% in terms of the amount of content that's out there, is going to be the real art. It's going to be the trick, right? So we have to seriously think about how we generate that kind of content for our clients. And it's something that I'm looking at now. I have to rethink about how my small business is structured and what my offer is, right? And then there is another bit. There is another bit that I think it's on my mind, but I'm not ready to address it yet because I have more pressing things that. And that is now those of us like yourself and myself who move across geographies, right? And you work across so many different time zones, and you work. A lot of what you do is based on relationships, and it's difficult to do this, to build a close, trusting relationship online with people of a certain ilk, people of a certain age, people of a certain background, who are not accustomed to this. They prefer people to sit in front of them and eyeball you. And this is not the same thing. So again, it goes back to now the nature of work and how that will change as the generational shifts take place in terms of people running the business and stepping up into positions of authority and decision making.
Yeah.
Right. So that's good. So business access, business modeling, market access is going to be something that needs to be looked at slightly differently now. As you know, I spent many years in the oil and gas industry, and a lot of the market access was done by people jumping on planes and going physical there and meeting with people and getting to know them. A lot of that will have to be decreased now, I believe, over the next year to 2 years. So how do they do that with advanced collaborative tools, right? Highly immersive visual environments, those sorts of things, So yeah, it's quite an interesting point in time.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. That was pretty comprehensive, in the sense that you've touched on quite a number of spaces, of fields of interest, and I expected no less, given your background and your experience. But you called one of them as it being particular interest to you, the human behavior side of things. So perhaps let's pay special attention to that. So we have social environments, we have economies, we have jurisdictions that may be, let's say, more informal and more relaxed, where following the rules may not be as easy as others. And then when you layer upon that, as you pointed out, the economic contraction, which can vary somewhere between a recession and a depression, depending on who you speak to. Then, and of course, unemployment, you'll have social issues following from that. So basically, I'd see that leading to a rise in social instability and social unrest. What are the implications of that? Let's play that out. What does that mean?
So social stability is something, is a concept, is a concept that's highly dependent on many inputting factors. The state of development of a country, the cultural balance that exists, the ethnic and cultural makeup of a society, and the generational balance of a society, and the wealth, obviously, of that society. You know, can a society sustain itself? Is a society well integrated enough, right, to withstand something like this? We are learning fast, you know, and we've seen it in the UK with Brexit, and, you know, and in America with the current politics that's taking place, and in places like the Caribbean, you know, where you have huge diasporic communities and melting pot societies, that in times of crisis, in times of challenge, actually, it's not a very unified, integrated society, right? When crises hit like this, or, you know, like you saw when socio-political systems are being challenged, and you know, Brexit, where the rise of fascism and nationalism and hatred that's creeping out of the woodwork. You'll start seeing more of this happening with things like this. You're seeing people of a certain ethnicity being spat upon in the US because they assume people, you know, the ignorance of people believe that this thing comes from China. So therefore they look that way, therefore they must be harbingers of this. You know, it's that reptilian brain that I think things like this will help us to shed more of a light on. Are our developing or developed societies integrated enough and tolerant enough to help weather these kinds of storms, right? And those factors that I alluded to earlier are some of the factors that influence that. On another scale, it's about human behavior in terms of econometrics. So, you know as well as I know, westernized economy is based on consumption and, you know, exchange value, exchange of money. And the levels of what is considered essential services, what's considered needs versus what's considered desires, right, in a wealthier economy, are things that need to be readdressed, right? Because as we see now, essential services and the lockdown and the stopping of all the things that people like doing versus the things that people need are causing stress levels to increase within them and within their families, right? The strain on these families, which are the nucleus of society, has been amplified tremendously in just the past 2 months. You know, the other bit that I'm looking at is mental health and well-being that's setting in within certain age groups and certain types of family units. Right? I think that's going to be something that needs to be really carefully addressed, you know, 5-6 months down the line, because we have seen many cases where when crises hit, mental health issues skyrocket, right? And the medical systems and the social systems can't support it, right? Look at recently with, you know, the present United States cutting funding to the WHO, right? And the UN agencies providing support to the local relief agencies. Now that's going to be impacted. So if the local medical and social systems can't contain and support its own population, it needs this injection. Well, when that is cut, it's cut. With the recession and the economic factors coming in, you can imagine what's going to happen, the ripple effect of that in human behavior, right? So this is something different. This is something different to the financial crisis, for example. You know, this is something different than war. You know, this is actually a more of an internal and societal conflict that is going to endure for quite a while. And then we don't know to what extent these superflus are going to transmogrify and mutate. Right? So that's the other thing that people need to seriously think about, you know, because we expect that this thing will mutate. And even if this comes to an end in 6 months, it's only a matter of time before something else comes.
That's right.
Right? So it's going to be the third decade of the 21st century is going to be defined by these kinds of situations. I think pandemics, whereas the second decade was defined a lot by, you know, war and natural disasters, and tsunamis and all these things. This decade is going to be largely pandemics, an epidemic, right? So that's the mental and holistic and medical health and well-being, I believe, are going to be a key part of the fabric of society going forward. And it's going to be probably a field, an industry that can blossom as a result of this. Humans need to take stock, of what they need and what they spend money on and what are essential versus desirable. And I think that will seriously impact the economies, particularly economies of developing markets.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because when I think of a developed economy, well, I guess you have two models, roughly speaking. So you have the European model, which has the social safety net. So they kind of have the infrastructure to weather a storm that disproportionately impacts more vulnerable, lower socioeconomic groupings. But then even within the developed world, you have the US, which does not have a social safety net. They have this stimulus bill, which would be good for a month or two, but then after, the 15, 20 million people, depending on who you talk to, the 20% of the population facing unemployment, they'll have to figure it out on their own. And then I think of the emerging markets, like what you just described, there's no social safety net. And so you'd have and then the institutions aren't as well developed, so that's a threat to law and order. So what I walk away from that line of thought feeling less encouraged. I feel, it seems as if it's going to be a struggle for a while. And it'll be, economics aside, there's a conversation about whether there'll be a V-shaped recovery, whether there'll be a U-shaped recovery, or maybe it'll be an L, whatever it is. But then as you're highlighting, we're forgetting the social side. And the social impact may be felt for a longer period of time, even beyond, a potential recovery. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, so let's build on that particular point around, I'll put this word out there, hope. I believe that I really believe that human beings are inherently good creatures. They want to do good. And I believe that at times like this, whilst you will see a large percentage of them will run amok and they would be tragic and they would fall and they will do bad things, there will also be a large percentage that will rise to the occasion and that they will try to unite and work. And that's what I'm hoping, that's what I'm focusing on. You know me for a long time, I'm more of a glass half full than a glass half empty. It doesn't mean I'm ignoring the dangers and the issues of security and safety. But I do believe that this will be another test of a series of tests for the beginning of this 21st century that will force human beings to start thinking and acting differently. And here's the bit on the generational bit. I believe that the millennials and the ones after, the people that we critique and feel that they are entitled and they are this and they are that, I think that they are going to surprise us. I think that they are going to thrive in a world of digital online relationships. I think they're going to thrive in a world of collective action. I think that their relative idealism due to their youth is going to motivate them to step up and start doing things differently. And it's up to our generation, the Gen Xers, who are now taking control of the institutions of the world, business, government, society, academia, to support them and to give them the tools and the motivation and inspiration to go off and make these changes. I think that a large percentage of the baby boomer population are now in retirement and living off the pension plans and stuff. I think a large percentage of them will face significant mental health issues because their coping mechanisms now due to age, right, is going to be challenged. And I think that loop on our ability to get the young ones to go back and help and add value to our elderly and vulnerable, right, while we broker between the two sides and we have to recraft the economies and the societies, are going to help set the stage for things in the latter part of this decade to start improving. But like you said, there is going to be a tumultuous period in between. But listen, since 2000, how many tumultuous periods we've had? Since 9/11 up until present. It has not been a century defined by calm. And yet still economies were thriving, economies were recovering. Japan's economy was shattered by the tsunamis. right? And look at how fast it's recovering. You know, the US, you know, America is an interesting example, because they are the world's superpower and they are the land of the free. And what has been happening over the last, 8 years, from in terms of their leadership, has really brought to light the factions that existed in society. So they're shedding light on them, so that at least lets people know what exists, rather than working in the shadows. So that's what I believe. The shadows are going to be less, and light is going to be cast. So at least we know what to anticipate. What's going to be key, I think, is how much courage and resilience we have as people, right, to address these changes consistently over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's going to be the true test of human behavior, society, communities, right? And we're starting to see little bits of it. We're seeing little bits of it here in a small place like Trinidad, where, yes, there is fear and there's, but you're seeing pockets of people coming together and pulling together, helping one another. And that's what you will see now coming out of this work. So, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's quite interesting. So, if I were to take that and pivot a bit to the business sphere, what industries or what sectors or what professions you see would have opportunities as we emerge from this situation?
So I think manufacturing, as global supply chains are now being recrafted, particularly, let's look at the Americas, for example. I can see an opportunity for Brazil and Mexico, and countries that to start taking on some of the capacity that was outsourced to Asia, right? I can see places like South Africa taking up some of the capacity that was in Indonesia, right? So I can see a balance of manufacturing capability. I can see the UK, which people don't really realize is really strong in manufacturing, actually taking up some more high-end manufacturing going forward, as well as some of the Central European countries like Czech Republic. So I think manufacturing is going to be an opportunity, right? Particularly for volume manufacturing. I think that obviously communication and digital. So we should have bought shares in Zoom last year because the share price skyrocketed. So advanced collaborative tools, I call them. APTs are going to increase in value, and there'll be opportunities for people who deliver professional services to deliver them via online platforms, right? So people like us who do, financial advisory services or marketing and reputation and social impact services to do this like this. I think that, interestingly enough, I think tourism and hospitality and how people eat and spend time together has an opportunity to evolve. I don't know how, but I think that it has an opportunity, probably not a significant one at the present, but there is an opportunity in how people socialize and how they consume food, right? If they do it well. Oil and gas and mining and the extraction industries and stuff will continue. They'll take a hit, but they will continue because the economies need them. They need to provide heat, light, and mobility. Some of the specialized industries, so healthcare, obviously, I think you're going to see not only the pharmaceutical companies, but all their supply chain, right? I think you're going to see social services increase in value, because people are now going to find innovative ways of taking care of their elderly and addressing the mental health and well-being issues that we alluded to earlier. So that's kind of what I see so far. Financial services, well, it's going to continue. How you deliver financial services, because it's going to be interesting. So people like yourself who are very innovative and forward-thinking, your ability and comfort in using advanced collaborative tools, I think is going to be key to your success. And I think you could have the opportunity to take market share from some of your big competitors if you do it well. The ability to develop relationships in the digital stratosphere is going to be key to your success. Right? Funny enough, and this is it sounds like a joke, but I really think it's real. As more people go online and start working online, I think beauty and how they present themselves is going to be really critical. So I think companies that produce personal care products and these sorts of things are going to have opportunities because people are going to be more conscious. People who didn't really like too much social media and want to be out there, like meetings, like being, are going to need to look at their appearance and how they present. I think the other thing that real estate management, so that's going to be an interesting one, particularly those, you know, those companies like Regis, provide shared office spaces and WeWork. I think they have an opportunity to create work environments that companies can now give up their dedicated office spaces and come and use temporary office spaces for specific purposes. And it will balance that with home working. So these sorts of, you know, the WeWorks, the Regises, etc., I think will have opportunities in this space, particularly as a larger organization that spend a lot of money in big buildings will now reduce their footprint, and they'll be moving toward that home, you know, rented office, rented collaborative spaces, and home working that will increase.
Okay, so I want to touch on 2 points you made. Let's start with the real estate one. That is interesting because obviously it has been evolving even before, and that's a point that I made, that there's nothing potentially new going to come out of this, but there'll be an acceleration of some of the trends that we may have seen pre-pandemic. Now, in terms of office space, we knew that there was a decline, sorry, I don't want to be too dramatic, in terms of retail space in the US and Canada. The UK has, as malls become less, let's say, fashionable, and the high street suffers in the UK perspective, in favor of your Amazon, your online space. But at the same time, it led to a need for more facilities for last mile delivery or warehousing, especially in the US where you have Amazon Prime, where things are going to be within a day or within an hour, depending on what it is. So having the warehousing in strategic location is super important. So I see that pivot, but at the same time, with the advancement in the collaborative technology that you spoke of, now if I had an office space that was 100 seats, maybe now 50, and 50 of my staff could work from home, or they could be on rotation where, you know, some people have Fridays off, some people have Mondays off. So, you know, I don't need that big space anymore. And yeah, I see that in some situations that could lead to an opportunity for your WeWorks, your Regises, and some spaces potentially not. And then, so we've touched on retail space, we've touched on commercial, and in terms of residential, everyone hates a long commute. And so you want to be ideally, let's say, within an hour of where you work. But if I'm working from home, I could go somewhere further out. It's potentially cheaper and I get more space. So that may lead to changes in the way that we look at real estate. So as someone said, real estate is fundamentally impaired. Real estate will be definitely impacted by this. But I wanted to go back to the point you were making, or you just touched on lightly, about travel and hospitality. You know, I think we will emerge from this more sensitive to issues of safety and sanitation and stuff like that, obviously. So if you're involved in hotels or restaurants, you'll probably be focusing in that direction. But then in terms of travel, I've heard some people say, again, borrowing the point you were making on the advancement in collaborative technology, maybe I won't have to do as many business trips. You could just do the Zoom. So, you know, so maybe, and then people, at least for a while, may be a bit nervous about international travel. And to be fair, they'll be economically constrained, so the capacity to pay for international travel may be less limited than before. So both on the business travel side and on the leisure travel side, we may see a slowdown. My question is, after saying all that, is do you think that this slowdown in travel industry would be short-term, or do you see it being long-term?
Good question. Let's look back at 9/11. And everybody assumed after 9/11, right, with the stresses on travel and the depth of, airfare skyrocketed. right? The process of traveling became really tedious, and everybody assumed that people were going to travel less. Didn't happen. The industry that people travel more, because what ended up happening was the airlines, and they started producing cheaper flights to go to places. And humans are inherently social creatures, right? I think again, we go back to the human behavior. The way they work and the way they socialize, right, are not necessarily the same, right? People, for example, who enjoy travel for the sake of going on a holiday, for getting away from their place, for will not give that up easily, right? They will take a short-term hit because the economy is hit, and they will staycation at home for a year, but then after they will start looking at opportunities to go. And as these offers start coming up, I mean, you spend a lot of time in the travel industry. As these offers start coming up and they're cheaper and more affordable, people will pay money and they'll go. Because the airlines and the tourism destinations, they will adjust their pricing and their offers suit. We know that. Otherwise, they'll go to overseas. In terms of working, right? 10 years ago, let's use the UK, for example, when I was at a major oil company, as you know, we introduced the whole concept of flexible working, right? As part of a global attraction and retention strategy. But we could not make it mandatory. Flexible working was, as we put it, up to line manager discretion. And that's always how flexible working is done, right? So many line managers, because of their behavior, because of their background, they wanted to see bums on seats. So instead of giving people the chance to work 2 days from home, right, or 3 days from home, they wanted them in the office 4 days, and they got 1 day at home, if so much, or none at all. So flexible working becoming mandatory because of something like this is going to be the game changer. And I don't know if it will become mandatory. So that will determine whether travel to work and travel for work, right, becomes lessened.
Yeah.
Right? So that's going to be the main influencing factor. Business travel, I think it's dependent on the type of industry you're in. So if you're in an industry or sector that has the ability to build relationships online and with relationships that are robust enough to support the signing of contracts of a certain size, then that would be great. But still, there are many industries that you still need to sit down in front of someone and they still need to see you and feel you. There are lots of people who do business that way. And as long as those things exist, travel will be necessary. I think frivolous travel right, for business will get cut out. But in many industries, frivolous travel started to get cut out 5 years ago as companies started becoming leaner and more fit for purpose. So that trend will continue. I think then companies will need to look at their operating model very carefully, and they will need to decide what are where the cost cuts coming from, right? And what are the mandatory bits of the business, especially things that need traveling. Are they mandatory? And if they are mandatory, will we support it by paying that kind of money? As long as they're willing to pay, the airlines and they will provide the service, right? And right? Governments might be forced to reduce duties and taxes on the airline industry to enable them to stay in operation. Who knows? I don't know what they'll do. But those sorts of things, I think it'll be largely due to work, social, right, and personal, right? Holidays and that sort of thing.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. So I wanted to switch now to geopolitics and pick your brains on your perspective on that. So let's talk about Europe for a bit. In terms of the response to this, we've seen less of a coordinated EU response and more individual nations doing their own thing. So, for example, Sweden is chasing herd immunity. Spain and Italy have been complete lockdown. And UK somewhere in between. So they've all been going their own way. And now, in the face of Brexit, and Brexit is apparently, it's real, it's going to happen, it's by the end of this year, it's done. What do you see the outlook being for the UK and its relationship with Europe and that whole European experiment? in, you know, in 2021 and beyond? Just
That's the issue du jour, isn't it? Good question. Let me think before I open my mouth and say something. Brexit was always going to be a provocative thing, right? You saw it by how long it took to become a reality, right? I think the EU as an institution will need to, things like the pandemic response and the way they go about, you know, coordinating and orchestrating this as a quasi-federal organization, is going to help identify just how big the gaps are between the way the countries do things, right? Particularly things like the medical systems and their social systems, right? Brussels does not dictate that. Countries do that at a local level. So if countries are operating at a local level, and like Sweden, for example, doing their own, well, Sweden's not part of the EU, but it is a neighbor to the EU. But if countries are going out there doing their own thing and succeeding, and Britain comes out of this and is succeeding and starts doing well, I think it's going to unravel the European Union further, because we know there are quite a few countries in the EU that don't actually want to be part of the EU anymore, right? So I think they're waiting to see how successful the UK is. Right, so the UK PLC and its ability to recraft its offer to the rest of the world, and its ability to leverage its core capabilities. I mean, the UK is still an industrialized nation, still the fifth largest economy in the world. Our prowess in engineering and IT skills, our design and construction and mining and extraction industries, our financial services prowess, our safety and security relative to other countries, you know, our Atlanticism, our relationship with the US, right? Those are pretty powerful things. And Britain has an opportunity to really craft a powerful offer for the rest of the world, right? So if it's successful and people start seeing from 2022, 2023, Britain doing relatively well, I think you'll begin to see a further unravel of the EU. And that's the thing that's scaring people, particularly Germany and France. Right? We know that the Central and Eastern European countries are tenuously there, right? And then you will have also the, I don't know what the effect of, when we see the number of deaths and how society recovers from this sort of pandemic. Right? We know that Europe as a region, I mean, think the last century, 2 world wars and so many other things. Right? It's now being faced with different kinds of challenges, and it's not the single wealthiest place on earth anymore. Right? They're going to have to. I believe that there's going to be a change, if not an unraveling of the EU. What that means for the UK and the US, well, that's where we get into the strength of their capability. Do they have, high-end services? Britain is positioned quite well to provide the world with high-end services, right? The US leads the way in terms of its military capability, its entrepreneurism, all these things. So if they can work together to provide a combined JV offer to the world, I think they will gain significant traction. And I think, with now what's happened in Asia, right? And Asians now questioning, the strength of their economies and their ability to respond. I think we're going to see now another rebalancing, another reshuffling. I think, so I believe that you will see geopolitically, whereas we were seeing the rise of the Asian tigers and the balancing of wealth up there, I believe you're going to start seeing a certain balance coming back and separating back across these regions. So, I mean, we talked about certain things when you were here last time that I won't talk about now, but we both know that there is also other things happening behind the scenes that is not public knowledge, right? So there's this, I think the rise of the Asian tigers is slowed down a bit. I think that there is now a recrafting of what the Western outlook will be.
Right? In particular, the Anglo-Saxon
Anglo-American way of
Anglo-American, yeah. Sorry, Anglo-American.
I think. I mean, we see it here in Latin America. So American propaganda is right through the region. As the US retracts its tentacles from other parts of the world and focuses on the Americas, right? Britain will have a chance to leverage those relations and its history in this region, right, to start recrafting offers within Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think that's a brilliant opportunity. Language skills, I know they don't speak English, is not relevant anymore, right? We now have technologies that can translate real time, right? So relationship building and the offer, real credible offers, and a certain amount of stability in a quite tumultuous, volatile period is what's going to influence business people. And business people influence geopolitics, right? That's how it works, especially in Western civilization. So there is going to be that reshuffling again.
Okay.
I mean, you're out in Asia, so here's a quick question for you. So you've been in Asia for the last, 15 years?
7 years, yeah.
Okay. And, you've been there with the aggressive expansion and the growth. Are you seeing that continued momentum for the next 5 years?
Well, yeah, so we're saying that pandemic hasn't created anything new. It's a continuation of trends that pre-existing. And before the pandemic, there was a slowdown in China. And China's growth has been slowing down. And as a result, the countries of Asia, which have really piggybacked on the China engine, have suffered. And Singapore being a notable exception, because Singapore has always had a different economic model, and it's very much focused on the US and Europe. Now, and when I say a slowdown, I'm not just talking about from, let's say, from the Philippines down to Indonesia, but I include Australia and New Zealand in that, because, as you know, Australia is heavily dependent on commodity exports.
Absolutely.
So the slowdown, which one would expect to continue post-pandemic, as the world, as you say, they revisit their supply chains, which would mean to some extent reducing their dependence on China. It would perhaps exacerbate the slowdown, and at least to the extent that China has an export-driven economic growth model. They can retool and repivot towards domestic economic expansion, but I question whether culturally that is a real substitute for the export growth model. But we'll see, time will tell. But in terms of Southeast Asia, there'll be that slowdown in the China growth model to the extent that they had like offshoring call centers, BPOs in Philippines. They were benefiting from tourism. That's all going to dry up. So they're going to face a real struggle in the near term, and that will have implications, of course, on social stability. And the focus would be less on, so these countries, they all were really looking to get a piece of the China engine. I think now they would look in a slightly different direction. So there will be a refocus on the Western economy, particularly the US, as the US is the engine, it's the world's reserve currency, it's the engine of the global economy. And that's the printing presses are running over time. And naturally, if you want to pull yourself out of this hole, that's where you need to look. That's where you need to look. And even putting aside economics, in terms of the politics of it, yes, the region to some extent does, perhaps less so than in the West, they do blame China for this situation. And to that extent, China investment, China relationships, it's not going to be politically favorable right now. So any leader would probably want to play down that angle and perhaps talk more about strengthening your relationship with your allies in Europe and North America. So yeah, my point is that I agree with what you said.
And to build on that point, I believe that this is where we will see the rise of the giant elephant. I think this is where we will see the rise of India. Okay. And India's relationship with America and Britain and Germany, right? And its ability now as a democracy. The FDI that's coming from the US and other big westernized economies into India. right? Bear in mind that India plays more by the rules, geopolitical rules, than China does. India is going to come and it's going to be a game changer within Southeast Asia. And I think people always said it will take too long. India's infrastructure isn't as advanced and we're too far behind. I think you're going to see a rapid increase in the infrastructure in India, right? To start taking up some of the manufacturing and services orientated, the global IT and manufacturing offer to the Western civilization, to the world. India's going to step into that role. I really believe that.
Well, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's something that's been playing on my mind as well. How would India? So historically, again, pre-pandemic, India hasn't had much of a foreign policy per se, not in the sense that we see it from, let's say, China, or even Taiwan. I mean, some small Asian countries and Malaysia, because India seemed to be, it's a huge subcontinent, obviously, and it seemed to be very preoccupied with maintaining internal stability and various separatist movements here and there. So the average Indian prime minister and cabinet, they'd spend a lot more of their time talking about keeping things turning inside and less on what's going on outside. Whereas China was different. They were, relatively speaking, cohesive, and they focused more on their reach, their global reach. And
was it really cohesive, or was it an authoritarian rule that brought that stability or that perceived stability?
So whether it be by, regardless of the political system, they seem to be able to leverage it in a way where they can have global reach, or at least regional reach, and to some extent global reach. Whereas India wasn't able to leverage a system to do that. However, India was able to do it in terms of its private sector companies. So China would be all about the state-run companies or the state-connected companies. And India is all about the private companies and the private entrepreneurs. So even though we spoke a lot about the rise in China, when you look at the entrepreneurs and the CEOs in Silicon Valley or even in the UK, it was more, you're probably going to see more Indian diaspora or Indian immigrants at boardroom level, at C-suite level, than you would see China immigrants or first generation kind of thing. So, you know, the guy who's the head of Alphabet now, the guy who's the head of Microsoft now, and they're not the exception. I mean, it's quite, so somehow that's where India's angle has been. Tata and the groups, the private sector groups, have been able to do a lot more, because I guess in the absence of the state-run enterprises in terms of the China model. So definitely I see an acceleration of that. I see it in Southeast Asia as well. When you look at Forbes' list of the wealthiest families in Singapore, the wealthiest families in Indonesia, you would see members of the Indian diaspora, whether it's first generation immigrants or whatever. And that is quite an achievement given their size and overall population is really minute, and for them to economically punch above their weight. So there's that. So now we cycle forward into the post-pandemic world. Yes, China is slowing down, demographic factors at play. India has the young, vibrant, energetic population. To what extent can they leverage that as a nation, however? I see Modi doing stuff which I know it's not in terms of the outside of India doesn't play well, because it appears as if he's targeting certain minority ethnic groups in favor of Hindu nationalism and stuff like that. But at the end of it, what we may see is that he's able to create a national identity which one can then mobilize in terms of more assertive foreign policy.
And do you see the similar trends happening in the US and Britain as they move toward this more national identity and really pushing it?
Yeah.
Right. So what we see happening now is this rise of nationalism once
Absolutely.
again.
Yes.
Because it's about mobilization and the ability to not just mobilize, but to scale up and offer rapidly. Right. And India is doing exactly what the US and Britain and other countries are doing. And that is going to be interesting now. I'm curious to see if that's going to work, because the point you alluded to earlier about the private sector driving economic growth and economic stability, I think is going to be key to this decade. I think we've seen too much evidence of state-run countries, right, falling apart because the political systems become mistrusted and become violated, right? So the private sector and business people stepping in, right, to mobilize and to make things happen. You and I both know we come from the private sector, right? Can actually get things done. And coming out of a pandemic world or any crisis-ridden world is the ability to get things done. And ability to get things done efficiently and low cost and in a sustainable manner, right? That's what's going to be key, and that's what this decade is going to be defined by. So that's why I think countries like, I'm using India as an example of its size and scale. Its ability to empower and mobilize its private sector to drive socioeconomic growth, and in effect will have a political impact, is different to the state-run economy that is dictated by politics. Right? That has a voting time frame and whatever, that's going to be a shift, right? I've seen too many examples, because I've been working in crises a lot when I was in my previous role. Countries coming out of crises needing to focus on economic growth and stability, and it's the private sector that was driving that, not the government. Right, and that's the role that the powers that America and Britain they have. They can go in and they can set up structure. They have so much experience now. Britain and its colonial past, I don't like to allude to it, but it now has experience in setting up a business model, a societal model, a fiscal policy, monetary policy, a parliamentary organization to get a country that's democratically mobilized. India will be the evidence, because this will now be the biggest democracy in the world, right? And if it works, and it works well with the support of the US and Britain, for example, oh my God, it will gain significant traction. And then you will see the medium-sized economies. Remember this Commonwealth. Remember the Commonwealth, the major economies of the Commonwealth, India, Australia, South Africa, etc., contribute about 48 to 53% of global GDP.
Wow.
Right? I mean, that alone tells you. If Britain gets its Commonwealth relationships going and they work well with the US to make this work, I mean, one language, common language, similar education systems, right? The professional services, the higher end services and manufacturing, in here, people can buy in Trinidad. People can source products out of South Africa now, right? Because it's the same language, it's the same. Bring it here cheaper and sell it cheaper than buying it in Brazil or out in Asia, right? And that's where the global supply chains are going to change. And I think people underestimate this Commonwealth world or the possibilities of the Commonwealth.
Okay. And speaking of the Commonwealth, and the last question in terms of the geopolitics side is the Caribbean. So earlier you indicated obviously that weather is an economy that has a lot of dependence on commodities like Jamaica, Trinidad. There's a slowdown as commodity prices are relatively weak for the other islands in terms of tourism that's taking a hit, and it'll take a while if and when it does recover to previous levels. So what's your outlook for the Caribbean?
I have to break up the Caribbean into some buckets for that. So if you think the most industrialized, wealthiest nations, Trinidad, Jamaica, right? Cuba is kind of the Caribbean, but let's take Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, for example, right? Those three countries alone, Trinidad is heavily energy dependent. So with the upcoming fall in oil prices, right, the economy is going to take another hit, just like it did 5 years ago, right? But it's become more state dependent rather than private sector dependent, right? Whereas Jamaica, on the other hand, is the other way. When it came out of its almost bankruptcy, their drive for entrepreneurism, their ability to make decisions faster and better, has given Jamaicans a point of advantage when it comes to entrepreneurship. Right. Its ability to build its SME base, right? So that's going to be interesting. I mean, I think for both countries who basically are roughly 60% of regional GDP.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be positive, but with challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Barbados, I mean, Neil Motley is doing, I mean, Barbados is largely some services, but tourism orientated,
Mm-hmm.
but it has its close ties to Britain. And Neil Motley is doing quite a good job,
Mm-hmm.
right, in rebalancing the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there will be, Barbados will have its loyal, it'll still be a loyal tourism destination, particularly for people like Brits and
Mm-hmm.
Western Europe coming there and North America going there.
Mm-hmm.
The small islands, I think, are going to suffer a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think, islands like St. Lucia and Antigua that are heavily tourism dependent, but there's an agriculture, sell bananas and this and that and the other. There's going to be a demand for their products, for their goods,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't contribute significant amount of GDP.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to struggle. And I think that CARICOM will need to find a different, a way of probably finding a fiscal safety pack
Mm-hmm.
for these smaller Caribbean islands.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I broke it up into different sectors. I think the industrialized nations will weather this.
Mm-hmm.
I think Trinidad will need to rebalance its economy a bit,
Mm-hmm.
right? Particularly in terms of the safety and social infrastructure in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jamaica stands a really good opportunity because of its ability to mobilize its private sector quite well. And Barbados will weather this quite well because they will band their pockets and manage their money better than before. Cuba, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know much about Cuba and how Cuba will fare. Bermuda is an extension of Britain, so that will continue to work. It's a financial center, as you know. And those I don't cut it. Those islands will prosper. They will continue to manage through the storm because of their role as financial centers. So yeah, I think the Caribbean faces some challenges, but I think it will weather this relatively well. Trinidad, I'm a bit concerned about safety and security. I mean, we're in April, and I think there are over 600 or 700 murders already in this small island of 1.25 million people. That's not a good run rate. And as pressures increase and people lose their jobs, crime rates soar. So that's going to be a major issue. And then, of course, with the Venezuelan people coming in, right, and that's going to be another bit of stress on the system, right? That other islands don't have to account for. So it's going to be challenging. I think Trinidad's going to take a serious hit this year and next year. But there is significant wealth, I believe. I mean, it's the fourth wealthiest nation by purchasing power parity in Latin America. So it does have just a distribution of wealth. Obviously, is different, but it is a wealthy island. So if the current government, is able, like it managed the COVID-19 relatively well, if they're able to manage the economy a bit better, I think they will recover. But it will take a hit first.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. Challenges, but the real message is hope. Mick, thank you for your time. And
You're welcome. Thank you, Derren. It's a pleasure.
Okay.
Right.